So my name is Angel Gomez. These are my flashcards. Okay. So how many of you guys have been judged by one look? I have. I was meeting with my UNLV counselor, and he took one look at my SAT scores and decided I wasn't the right fit for his program. Granted, I was top of my class, I was a corps commander, and I was also president of 8 different clubs. So how do I not fit into your program? A lot of these tests, like standardized testing, actually discriminate against students, and I believe that they should be omitted when making college decision admissions. Let's start with how they affect the student. Donald Campbell, a social scientist from the book The Test, states that when test scores become the goal of the teaching process, they both lose their value as indicators of educational status and distort the educational process in undesirable ways. This is actually what's currently happening. These tests determine whether we pass or fail a grade and whether or not we graduate. This also puts a lot of the minorities at a disadvantage, such as the people who learn English as a second language, the poor, or those with learning disabilities. Not only does it affect the students, it also affects the teachers because they get fired over the low test scores. It affects the schools and they end up closing down, and it even affects the districts and the states because they lose their financial funding aids. And then there are the people who actually manipulate the statistics, like Lorenzo Garcia, a superintendent of El Paso. He received $56,000 in bonuses for most improved scores. Between the years of 2004 and 2010, he targeted lower achieving students and sent them to charter schools. He put those that came from Mexico in the wrong grades despite their age, and then he and his conspirators deleted credits and changed the grades to improve scores. There are many cases like these that were also reported. According to Kamenetz, if a child either hits the ceiling with a perfect score or bottoms out on the test score, this will tell the teacher very little about which areas she needs to work on. Not only that, when students actually set goals and they end up missing the marks, they end up feeling like failures, and they end up with low self-esteem. So now that we've discussed how testing affects students, let us discuss how some of these tests are flawed. So according to an article found on the NewYorkDailyNews.com from June 19, 2012, there's a pineapple question on a standardized test, which is basically the same story as the hare and the tortoise, but the tortoise is replaced by a pineapple. The pineapple actually challenges the hare, ends up losing, and the hare's friends end up eating it. So the question on the test ends up being, who was the wisest animal and why did they eat the pineapple? And if you can't answer this, how do you expect a 13-year-old to answer this question as well? These tests are actually sent off to independent contractors by the testing facilities, and they're graded by people that have no relevance in a degree or background in education for $15 an hour. Now, Heather Vogel did a study. She's from Atlanta Journal-Constitution for a year, and she reviewed 92,000 questions over 2 years for 42 states. And the results were that 10% of the questions were actually had incorrect answers, or they had debatable answers, meaning more than 2 answers. This means that the tests are flawed, and it brings the questions into doubt. So if those are flawed, what about the essays? Essays are supposed to demonstrate that understanding and comprehensiveness, and they're actually graded by temp workers who only spend about 2 minutes on the test. In 2014, College Board actually announced that it would be optional for the SATs to use essays on their test because it doesn't really give insight on what a student can do. So now that we discussed that standardized testing can be faulty, let's discuss how standardized testing can affect college admissions. Thomas Roken, who was a former executive director for the GRE testing program and is now president of Ithaca College, has decided in joining the decisions to omit standardized testing. He says that they actually limit the pool of applicants, and he states that an internal study showed similar results validating that the loss of test scores information at the time of admission makes very little difference in our ability to identify how successful applicants will later become as college students, and this was according to a US news article. So students actually shy away from applying to schools because of the SAT scores, and since they switched over to omitting them, their applications have increased by 15%, and that means 4,000 new applicants. They concluded that these are actually tools rather than ends in themselves, and they're helpful but not in a really big way. There was a rhetoric written by Katie Wallace from Iowa State University, which says that most college-bound students take the essay or ACT, and they're supposed to demonstrate how much intelligence one holds and foretell how one will handle college, but they actually just focus on the score and not the education process. You take this test for about 3 hours, and it doesn't successfully show your traits like setting goals, real-world knowledge, or any of the study habits that you have. The lowest participation for these tests are actually between the English learners, which is 21%, American Indians, which is 27%, low income African American and Latino students, which are 34% each. And some of this results come from the test actually being way too expensive that they can't even afford it to begin with, according to Michelle Matre from edsource.org. So all of these tests actually do more harm than good, and they discriminate against the students, the teachers, and the schools. These tests are flawed, and they judge a book by a cover, which is not what we're supposed to be doing. It's like the first thing we're taught when we're little. And then on top of that, they show very little of your full potential. So by omitting these tests, we actually have a better chance for minorities and a better education, and you expand the student body. So if you read the test and you base it off of the achievements that you've done over the 12 years, you have a chance for academically capable students to apply to colleges. And then it improves the education for them. Rather than focusing on the test scores, you get to focus on standard curriculums. So if you think it's fair for some colleges to automatically deny you because of one test while others don't, we should probably see this as a change for action, because then it'll lead to a better quality of education, which leads to a better quality of life.